Right, listen here. Most folks think Snapchat is just another messaging app where photos disappear after 10 seconds. What they've actually built is the most sophisticated addiction machine in digital history, disguised as an innocent photo-sharing app. Their main competitor, Instagram, recently launched their location sharing feature, which proves they're still copying Snapchat's psychological tricks from years ago. Tricks so effective that 932 million people now check this simple photo app multiple times daily without realizing they're responding to carefully engineered behavioral triggers. The hidden truth isn't that teens love taking photos. It's that Snapchat figured out how to make photo-taking compulsive through variable reward schedules, social pressure systems, and fear-based engagement tactics that would make casino designers weep with envy. Then every other social media company copied these techniques, spreading Snapchat's psychological innovations to billions of users worldwide. Instagram's new location feature isn't just copying SnapMap from 2017. It's Meta admitting that even 8 years later, they're still following Snapchat's playbook for controlling human attention. Now, before we dive into this tale of accidental psychological manipulation disguised as teenage fun, do me a favor and hit the like and subscribe buttons. You'll want to stick around for more stories about how Silicon Valley discovered that addiction is the most profitable product of all. Those 932 million monthly users aren't just customers. They're test subjects in humanity's largest experiment in engineered compulsion. With 460 million people opening Snapchat daily, predominantly teenagers and young adults, the app has achieved something unprecedented, making photo sharing feel mandatory rather than optional. Users check the app an average of 30 times per day, spending over 30 minutes scrolling through content designed to keep them scrolling longer. Instagram's Stories feature, launched in 2016, was a direct copycat of Snapchat's innovation. Facebook's status updates adopted Snapchat's disappearing content model. YouTube Shorts copied Snapchat's vertical video format. This week's Instagram location sharing announcement represents the latest heist in what can only be described as the most systematic corporate copying in modern technology. Meta's $2 trillion market value is built partly on behavioral innovations that 3 Stanford students stumbled upon whilst trying to solve social media anxiety. Revenue figures expose the economic reality of engineered addiction. Snapchat's 99% advertising-dependent business model works because their psychological techniques create the perfect advertising environment. Highly engaged users checking frequently throughout the day, providing detailed behavioral data through compulsive usage patterns. The competitive landscape has become absurd through systematic copying. TikTok's algorithm uses engagement techniques Snapchat pioneered. Instagram Reels copied TikTok's copy of Snapchat's short-form, vertical video format. Google's YouTube Shorts joined the copying parade. WhatsApp integrated Stories functionality across Meta's platform portfolio. The entire social media industry now operates on psychological principles that Snapchat discovered accidentally whilst trying to reduce social media pressure. What makes this situation particularly maddening is that Snapchat continues innovating whilst competitors profit from their previous innovations. Their recent AI-powered AR lenses, multimodal AI integration, and planned 2026 Spectacles launch represent continued behavioral engineering research the competitors will inevitably copy. They're running a behavioral psychology lab disguised as a technology company, with every breakthrough immediately stolen by better-resourced rivals. The true measure of Snapchat's innovation impact isn't their own financial performance. It's the collective value created across the industry through copied techniques. Instagram's billion-plus users engaging with stolen Stories features. YouTube Shorts generating massive revenue through Snapchat's vertical video format. WhatsApp Status connecting billions through Snapchat's ephemeral content model. The Stanford students who rejected Facebook's acquisition didn't just build a company, they accidentally redesigned human-digital interaction patterns. The story begins in 2011 at Stanford University, where 3 students were trying to solve what seemed like a simple problem: Social media posts felt too permanent, creating anxiety about posting anything authentic or spontaneous. Evan Spiegel, Bobby Murphy, and Reggie Brown had no idea they were about to stumble upon psychological techniques that would reshape how billions of people interact with technology. Their original concept, Peekaboo, was supposed to reduce social media pressure by making photos disappear after viewing. It was meant to be liberating, not addictive. But something unexpected happened during early testing. Instead of reducing phone-checking behavior, disappearing content made users check their phones more frequently. The fear of missing ephemeral content created a constant state of social anxiety. Users worried that important messages might vanish before they could see them. Paradoxically, solving social media anxiety had created a different, more powerful form of digital compulsion. The behavioral psychology behind this accidental discovery was profound. Traditional social media operated on fixed reward schedules. Posts stayed visible until manually deleted, creating predictable engagement patterns. Snapchat introduced variable reward schedules similar to gambling systems, where users never knew when important content might appear or disappear. This uncertainty created checking compulsions that traditional social media couldn't match. Early user interviews revealed patterns that would alarm any developmental psychologist. Students reported checking Peekaboo every few minutes, worried about missing messages that might vanish. The solution to social media anxiety was creating more intense behavioral dependencies. Reggie Brown, the third co-founder, began expressing concerns about the psychological impact of their creation during this early period. His departure following a 2014 legal settlement suggests early internal tensions about exploiting user behavior for commercial purposes. Brown had witnessed the transformation from well-intentioned social experiment to systematic behavioral manipulation, and apparently wanted no part of the monetization strategy. September 2011 brought the official launch as Snapchat, with refined features designed to amplify the accidental psychological discoveries. The 10-second message timer created artificial urgency. Screenshot notifications introduced social surveillance elements. The app's interface was deliberately simple, hiding sophisticated behavioral engineering behind user-friendly design that made compulsive checking feel natural and effortless. The Stanford connection provided crucial advantages for developing psychological techniques. The students weren't just building an app. They were conducting real-time psychological experiments on their peer group. User growth during this period reflected the addictive potential of their innovations. Within months, Stanford students were spending hours daily on an app designed for quick photo sharing. Usage patterns resembled addiction behaviors, tolerance, withdrawal, and social disruption. Most importantly, the students had discovered something unprecedented. They could make communication itself feel addictive by introducing artificial scarcity and social pressure into digital interactions. Between 2013 and 2015, Snapchat transformed from accidental psychological experiment into deliberate behavioral engineering laboratory, developing techniques that would become the foundation of modern social media addiction. Each new feature wasn't just adding functionality, it was systematically exploiting different aspects of human psychology to create compulsive usage patterns. The launch of Stories in October 2013 represented perhaps the most significant innovation in social media history. Unlike permanent posts that users could view anytime, Stories created artificial scarcity through 24-hour expiration timers. This introduced fear of missing out, FOMO, as a core engagement mechanism. Users had to check regularly or risk missing content forever. The psychological impact was immediate and powerful. Casual browsing became urgent checking behavior. Stories also introduced social hierarchy systems that created checking anxiety. Users could see who viewed their stories and in what order, creating social feedback loops that encouraged more frequent posting and checking. The Viewed By feature transformed passive content consumption into active social participation. Snap Streaks, introduced in 2015, represented the most cynical exploitation of behavioral psychology yet developed. By gamifying daily communication through consecutive day counting systems, Snapchat created artificial obligations that users felt compelled to maintain. Losing a streak, even accidentally, generated genuine distress among users who had invested weeks or months maintaining daily exchanges purely for numerical achievement. The psychological mechanisms behind streaks were devastatingly effective. Loss aversion psychology made breaking streaks feel like actual losses rather than missed opportunities. Social pressure meant streak maintenance involved two people, creating mutual behavioral dependencies. The daily requirement established Snapchat as essential daily habit rather than optional entertainment. My mate's daughter broke up with her ex-boyfriend more than a year ago and is still sending him messages every single day just to maintain their Snap streak. That's absolutely mental, but it perfectly demonstrates how these psychological techniques override rational behavior. The number on the screen has become more important than the actual relationship, proving how successfully Snapchat engineered compulsive behavior disguised as social connection. Best friends lists introduced social surveillance and hierarchy anxiety into casual friendship. The algorithm-determined rankings made friendship feel quantifiable and competitive, encouraging users to message more frequently to maintain or improve their social status within the app. SnapMap, launched in 2017, pioneered location-based social surveillance that Instagram would finally copy 8 years later in 2025. The feature allowed users to see friends' real-time locations, creating new forms of social anxiety around physical presence and activity. Users began feeling obligated to maintain interesting social lives, visible through location sharing, or alternatively, anxiety about appearing antisocial through location privacy settings. AR filters and lenses transformed simple photo taking into compelling augmented reality experiences that encouraged frequent camera usage. But the psychological hook went deeper than entertainment value. The filters created appearance, anxiety, and social comparison behaviors. Users began feeling uncomfortable posting photos without digital enhancement, establishing Snapchat as essential for acceptable self-presentation. Screenshot notifications introduced digital surveillance into private communication, creating posting anxiety and social pressure around sharing personal content. Users knew their recipients would be notified if they screenshot messages, adding social consequences to previously private actions. This feature made ephemeral content feel more precious, whilst simultaneously creating new forms of social tension. The discovery of variable reward schedules became central to all feature development. Unlike email or text messaging with predictable notification patterns, Snapchat's engagement triggered unpredictable reward distributions, creating checking compulsions similar to gambling behavior. Each feature worked synergistically to create comprehensive behavioral dependencies. Stories created time pressure. Streaks created daily obligations. Best friends created social competition. Screenshot notifications created social surveillance. Together, these techniques transformed casual communication into compulsive digital behavior. November 2013 brought one of the most consequential business decisions in technology history, though few recognized its significance at the time. Mark Zuckerberg offered Evan Spiegel $3 billion cash for Snapchat, an enormous sum for a company that was barely 2 years old and had no revenue. Spiegel's rejection would reshape the entire social media landscape and establish copying as the dominant competitive strategy in Silicon Valley. Zuckerberg's offer revealed how quickly Facebook recognized the existential threat that Snapchat represented. Facebook's engagement metrics were already showing concerning trends. Younger users were spending less time on the platform, finding permanent posting too socially risky. Snapchat's ephemeral content and psychological techniques were attracting exactly the demographic that Facebook needed to maintain growth. The $3 billion valuation wasn't based on revenue or traditional business metrics. It was Facebook's assessment of Snapchat's behavioral innovations' worth. Zuckerberg understood that social media was entering a new phase where psychological engagement techniques would determine market dominance. Acquiring Snapchat meant obtaining the most advanced behavioral engineering technology in existence. Spiegel's rejection reasoning, shared in later interviews, reflected both idealism and strategic miscalculation. He believed Snapchat could build something larger than Facebook by continuing to innovate rather than selling to a competitor. The independence would allow deeper exploration of behavioral psychology without Facebook's corporate constraints. Most crucially, he underestimated how effectively Facebook could copy innovations without owning them. Facebook's response established the template for modern technology competition. Instead of developing original behavioral techniques, they would systematically copy Snapchat's innovations across their platform portfolio. This strategy proved devastatingly effective. Facebook had the engineering resources to implement copies quickly and the massive user base to make copied features more profitable than original versions. The copying began almost immediately. Facebook introduced Slingshot in 2014, a direct Snapchat clone that failed due to poor execution. Instagram launched Stories in August 2016, a nearly identical copy of Snapchat's signature feature that succeeded massively due to Instagram's larger user base. WhatsApp introduced status updates using Snapchat's 24-hour disappearing content model. Facebook's main platform added Stories functionality across the entire social network. The psychological warfare intensified as Facebook recognized that copying individual features wasn't sufficient. They needed to copy the underlying behavioral engineering principles. Instagram's Stories implementation included view counts, viewer lists, and social hierarchy features designed to replicate Snapchat's engagement psychology. The copied features weren't just functional equivalents, they were psychological equivalents designed to create identical compulsive behaviors. Spiegel's decision to maintain independence enabled more aggressive psychological experimentation that Facebook's corporate structure might have constrained. Snapchat could develop features specifically designed to maximize addictive potential without considering the broader social responsibility concerns that Facebook faced as a larger, more scrutinized company. This freedom accelerated innovation in behavioral manipulation techniques. The revenue implications of the rejection became clear over subsequent years. Facebook's copied features generated billions in advertising revenue through captured user attention. The economic value of behavioral innovations was being captured primarily by the copying company rather than the innovating one. Competition dynamics shifted fundamentally after the rejection. Instead of acquiring innovative companies, major technology firms began systematic copying strategies. The industry had learned that innovation could be more profitable when stolen than when purchased. The $3 billion rejection established precedent for how innovation would be handled in modern technology. Companies would develop breakthrough techniques, demonstrate their effectiveness, then watch larger competitors copy successful innovations with superior execution and distribution. March 2nd, 2017 marked a watershed moment in technology finance when Snapchat went public at $17 per share, achieving a $24 billion valuation that would peak at $30 billion on opening day. Wall Street was essentially betting on Snapchat's ability to continue innovating faster than competitors could copy their breakthroughs, a wager that would prove more complicated than anyone anticipated. The IPO prospectus revealed the full scope of Snapchat's behavioral engineering achievements for the first time. SEC filings detailed user engagement metrics that made traditional social media look primitive. Average users opening the app over 18 times daily, spending more than 30 minutes engaged with content designed to maximize attention capture. These weren't just impressive statistics, they were evidence of successful psychological manipulation at unprecedented scale. Institutional investors recognized they were buying shares in something entirely new, a company whose primary asset was expertise in human behavioral control rather than traditional technology infrastructure. Snapchat's servers and software were valuable, but their real competitive advantage was understanding how to make digital communication compulsive through carefully designed psychological triggers. The timing proved both fortunate and problematic. Facebook's systematic copying campaign was already reducing Snapchat's uniqueness, but their innovations were spreading so rapidly across the industry that investors couldn't ignore the underlying value of behavioral engineering techniques. Every major technology company was implementing Snapchat's discoveries, validating their effectiveness whilst reducing their exclusive value. Spectacles, launched in 2016 ahead of the IPO, represented Snapchat's attempt to stay ahead of copying through hardware innovation. The AR-enabled sunglasses were marketed as fun consumer electronics, but they actually represented sophisticated behavioral research tools. Every user interaction provided data about real-world social behavior that could inform future engagement techniques. Revenue projections in the IPO filing revealed the economic model underlying behavioral addiction. Advertisers were willing to pay premium rates for access to highly engaged users whose attention had been captured through psychological techniques. The business model wasn't just selling advertising space, it was selling guaranteed user attention that had been engineered through behavioral manipulation. User demographics highlighted the ethical implications of going public on addiction-based business models. Over 60% of Snapchat's users were under 25, meaning the company was primarily monetizing psychological techniques developed to control young people's behavior. Institutional investors were essentially funding research into how to make digital communication compulsive for developing minds. International expansion plans outlined in SEC filings revealed ambitions to export behavioral engineering techniques globally. Snapchat would spread psychological innovations that American teenagers had beta tested to young people worldwide, creating a global laboratory for studying cultural variations in digital addiction susceptibility. The IPO was funding international behavioral research disguised as social media expansion. Competition analysis in the filing acknowledged the copying threat whilst downplaying its significance. Snapchat's lawyers had to explain how a company could maintain competitive advantages when larger rivals were systematically copying every innovation. The legal argument essentially claimed that innovation speed could outpace copying speed, a theory that market performance would soon test. Stock performance immediately after the IPO reflected investor uncertainty about the innovation versus copying dynamic. The public offering created unprecedented transparency around behavioral engineering business models, revealing how psychological manipulation techniques translated into corporate profits. The broader implications were staggering. Wall Street had validated behavioral engineering as a legitimate business model worthy of public investment. Pension funds, university endowments, and retirement accounts were now invested in companies whose primary expertise was making digital communication compulsive for young people. The IPO had transformed psychological manipulation from Silicon Valley experiment into mainstream investment category. The years following Snapchat's IPO witnessed nearly every major platform reverse engineering the psychological techniques that Stanford students had pioneered. What began as competitive feature copying evolved into wholesale adoption of behavioral engineering principles across the entire social media industry. Instagram's Stories implementation in 2016 proved that copied features could become more profitable than original versions when deployed at scale. Within 2 years, Instagram Stories surpassed Snapchat's entire user base, generating billions in advertising revenue through psychological techniques that Snapchat had invented, but Instagram could monetize more effectively due to their massive existing user base. YouTube's entry into the copying wars came with YouTube Shorts in 2020, directly implementing Snapchat's vertical video format and psychological engagement techniques. Google's massive infrastructure allowed them to deploy copied features to billions of users simultaneously, whilst adding algorithmic enhancements that made behavioral manipulation more effective than Snapchat's original implementation. TikTok represented perhaps the most sophisticated copying operation, taking Snapchat's behavioral engineering principles and amplifying them through advanced artificial intelligence. The Chinese-owned platform used psychological techniques pioneered by Stanford students to create engagement levels that exceeded even Snapchat's addictive capabilities. The student innovation had evolved into state-level behavioral control technology. WhatsApp Status brought ephemeral content to Meta's messaging platform, implementing Snapchat's 24-hour disappearing model for billions of global users. The copying was so blatant that WhatsApp didn't even attempt to disguise the borrowed psychological techniques. They simply ported Snapchat's engagement methods directly into their existing infrastructure. Facebook's main platform introduced Stories functionality across their entire social network, copying not just the feature, but the underlying psychological architecture that made ephemeral content compulsive. Every major Facebook property now used behavioral techniques that Snapchat had developed, creating a portfolio of addiction-based platforms, all using stolen psychological innovations. Twitter's brief experiment with Fleets revealed how even companies outside the photo-sharing space recognized the value of Snapchat's behavioral discoveries. Although Fleets eventually failed, the attempt demonstrated that every social media company felt compelled to implement ephemeral content techniques regardless of platform compatibility. The copying extended beyond individual features into systematic adoption of psychological principles. Variable reward schedules, social hierarchy displays, artificial scarcity creation, and FOMO-based engagement became standard across all platforms. International markets provided perfect laboratories for testing copied versus original implementations. In regions where Snapchat had limited presence, users experienced Instagram stories or WhatsApp status as original features rather than copies. Billions of people worldwide were using psychological techniques developed by Stanford students without knowing Snapchat had pioneered them. Snapchat's response strategy involved accelerating innovation to stay ahead of copying cycles, but this created its own problems. Rapid feature development meant less testing of psychological impacts, potentially creating more harmful behavioral effects. The pressure to innovate faster than competitors could copy was driving more aggressive psychological experimentation. The revenue implications became clear through comparative analysis. Instagram's copied stories feature generated more advertising revenue than Snapchat's entire platform, despite using identical psychological techniques. Scale advantages meant that stealing innovation was more profitable than developing it, fundamentally altering competitive dynamics across the technology industry. Legal protections for behavioral innovations proved essentially non-existent. Copyright and patent law couldn't protect psychological techniques, meaning successful behavioral engineering automatically became public domain for competitors to copy. Snapchat had no legal recourse against systematic copying of their most valuable innovations. This week's Instagram announcement of location sharing features represents the most recent episode in 8 years of systematic copying. The new functionality directly implements SnapMap concepts from 2017, proving that Meta continues following Snapchat's innovation playbook, even as both companies face increasing regulatory scrutiny. The broader industry impact was profound. Behavioral engineering had become commoditized through copying, but the psychological effects were amplified as techniques spread across multiple platforms. Users were now experiencing Snapchat's addiction-inducing innovations across their entire digital ecosystem, creating unprecedented levels of behavioral manipulation. Snapchat plus subscriptions, generating $600 million annually from 15 million users, represented their attempt to monetize original innovation before competitors could copy premium features. But even this strategy faced limitations. Successful premium psychological techniques would inevitably be copied into free competing platforms. August 6, 2025, brought a sobering reality check when Snapchat reported quarterly earnings that exposed the fundamental contradiction at the heart of their business. They continued leading innovation in behavioral engineering whilst losing market share to companies that had stolen their techniques and executed them more profitably. The financial results were paradoxical and painful. User engagement remained exceptionally strong, with 932 million monthly active users spending significant time daily on the platform. Yet revenue growth had slowed to just 9% year over year, compared to Meta's platforms showing stronger advertiser preference. The company that pioneered social media addiction was losing the monetization battle to competitors using their own psychological innovations. Stock market reaction was swift and brutal. Shares plummeted 20% in a single day, wiping out $3 billion in market value as investors realized that innovation leadership didn't translate to business dominance when competitors could copy successful techniques without development costs or risks. Wall Street had finally understood the fundamental flaw in betting on behavioral engineering companies competing against larger platforms. The earnings call revealed technical problems that highlighted Snapchat's operational vulnerabilities. An advertising platform glitch had disrupted revenue generation precisely when competitors were strengthening their own ad systems using psychological techniques that Snapchat had pioneered. The irony was devastating. Technical failures in monetizing their own innovations, whilst competitors profited from stolen implementations. User loyalty statistics from the earnings report demonstrated the persistence of psychological techniques that Snapchat had developed. Despite stock crashes and technical problems, user retention remained exceptionally high, with daily active users continuing to open the app multiple times daily. The behavioral dependencies that Stanford students had accidentally created proved remarkably durable, even during corporate crisis. Competition analysis revealed the scale disadvantage that plagued Snapchat despite their innovation leadership. Instagram's implementation of copied stories reached over 1 billion users compared to Snapchat's entire user base of 932 million. Advertiser preference data showed the cruel mathematics of the copying economy. Brands increasingly allocated budgets toward Meta's platforms that used Snapchat's psychological techniques but offered superior reach, targeting capabilities, and technical reliability. Innovation was less valuable than execution when the psychological foundations were identical across platforms. Regulatory pressure added another challenge as government agencies scrutinized social media companies for behavioral manipulation techniques that Snapchat had pioneered. Child safety advocates and mental health researchers were documenting harmful effects of psychological techniques that had originated with Stanford students trying to reduce social media anxiety. The innovations were creating regulatory backlash across the entire industry. International market performance revealed how copying had damaged Snapchat's global expansion prospects. In regions where Instagram or WhatsApp had established presence using copied features, users saw no compelling reason to adopt Snapchat's original implementations. The first-mover advantage in behavioral engineering had been neutralized by competitors with superior distribution. Snapchat Plus subscription success provided the only bright spot in an otherwise challenging landscape. 15 million users paying for premium psychological features generated $600 million in annual recurring revenue, proving that some users would pay for enhanced versions of behavioral techniques they were getting free on competing platforms. But this represented a tiny fraction of the total market. Future product development faced the innovation dilemma that had plagued Snapchat since going public. Every successful psychological technique would be immediately copied by competitors with larger user bases and better monetization infrastructure. The planned 2026 Spectacles launch and AI integration initiatives would likely face the same copying challenges that had undermined previous innovations. The artificial intelligence arms race added complexity to the competitive landscape. Snapchat's AI-powered features and multimodal AR lenses represented continued innovation in behavioral engineering, but Meta and Google had superior AI infrastructure to implement copied techniques more effectively once Snapchat proved their psychological impact. Employee retention became challenging as talented engineers and behavioral researchers recognized they could implement their innovations more lucratively at larger platforms. The psychological techniques developed at Snapchat were valuable across the industry, but scale economics made those techniques more profitable when deployed by competitors. Snapchat's $13 billion market cap represented a significant discount to the value that their psychological techniques generated across the industry through systematic copying. The fundamental business model question remained unanswered. How could a company maintain competitive advantages in behavioral engineering when successful techniques became industry standard through copying? Snapchat had pioneered the psychological foundations of modern social media addiction, but competitors were capturing most of the economic value through superior execution of stolen innovations. Right? Well, there you have it. 3 Stanford students trying to reduce social media anxiety accidentally created the psychological control systems that now govern how billions interact with technology daily. Snapchat didn't just build a messaging app, they built the blueprint for digital behavioral manipulation that every major platform has systematically stolen and deployed at global scale. The hidden truth about Snapchat isn't that teens love taking photos. It's that psychological techniques developed by college students have become the foundation of a trillion-dollar industry built on engineered addiction, with Instagram's recent location sharing launch representing just the latest borrowing an idea in a decade-long pattern of copying that's made behavioral engineering commoditized across the entire technology industry. You'll want to stick around for more stories, as our world is filled with plenty more of these balmy stories. Bah! Humbug!